everybody, it's Romania Black. Guess what? No, I couldn't wait. No, I was talking to my brother. I have a reason that I'm watching ahead. I usually watch Death Note like on the weekends, and I am going to be out of town this weekend. My brother and I are going on a trip together, a sibling vacation trip before school starts, and so we're going out of town this weekend, and so I'm recording this a little bit ahead. So I'm recording this before episode 17 comes out on Patreon and before episode 16 comes out on Death Note, but I have a feeling with what the comments are going to say, I'm going to want to have watched ahead, because I was telling my brother, I was like, so this is just bonkers. This is just bonkers. He had Light right where he wanted him, and then Light pulls this ballsy move and is like, okay, well now I forgot that I'm Kira, so you can't really convict me, right? And so El's like, ugh. So it's like, I don't know, I feel weird about it, because it's almost like Light's ego had become endearing, and I'd almost kind of become used to him being so egotistical and maniacal, and now that side of him is gone, and we can say it's connected to the Death Note, we cannot. We'll talk about that in the comments here in a second. It makes it kind of different, and so I was telling my brother, I was like, I don't know what to think, and my brother's like, well, it's like Moriarty got amnesia and became Watson, and I was like, oh my god, it is! It's like Moriarty got amnesia and became Watson to L. Sherlock. And I'm like, oh my god, that's exactly what it is. And my brother was like, I was like, ah! And I've sworn my brother to secrecy. He's not spoiling me on anything, but that's all he would say. And I was like, you're so right. But yeah, it's literally like Light has become the sidekick to L. And the funny thing is that the Light that we've known the last 15 episodes has such an ego and God complex. It's like he'd think that Light right now is acting awful. I'd be totally against it. So I'm very curious to know if Light does get the Death Note back, if he does either retain or regain the memories he had from before, or otherwise, what's going to happen? So, or will this Light want the Death Note back? That's the crazy thing. Will Light want the Death Note back? It's the craziest thing. Let's talk about the comments, because I wanted to note some things. I went back and rewatched the episode in the dub, which, fun time. Aizawa in the dub is great when he was like, all right, Miss Amani, let's go back to your room. Like, he's like had enough of Misa. It's great. But I do have a few little comments before we start. Alexander Q, and we'll kind of bookend with this. Alexander Q talked about how Light's tower in episode 15 is closed off and centered around himself, whereas L's has more options for movement and adjustment. But the tower also... I commented with Alexander Q, it's interesting, and I couldn't comment at the time because we weren't there yet, but with the tower that L says they're going to hold up in the last episode, it's funny because, yeah, L's tower in the vision is very open, has ladders, people can move up and down it, whereas Light's is just this monolith and he's all by himself at the top. But the tower that L has constructed for them to stay in kind of looks like Light's tower, which again, we're drawing those comparisons between Light and L. So it's like, okay, this is L becoming more closed off from everyone else in his quest to prove that Light is Kira. Is he shutting people away to try to prove, because Aizawa made a note, he's like, you're just doing this because you don't want to be proven wrong. And L's never been wrong. So it's like, ooh, is this whole quest to prove that this one person is in fact Kira, is that going to drive L to insanity and drive him to paint himself as a bad guy? I'm like, this could be the long way around. I said back several episodes ago when Light told Ryuk he was going to say goodbye to him, I theorized that L would end up with the Death Note. But no, I think Light wants to pin L as, at the time I thought Light wanted to pin L as Kira, but now I'm like, no, Light mainly wants to drive L insane and pin him as the bad guy in all of this, and Light will be the grand, person in the end of things. I still believe that. I think that Light's plan was to like unravel L from within. Now, whether L is going to figure that out or if he even can, that remains to be seen, but I thought that was interesting. And it kind of ties to Ian Prizer's comment about how L lets others into his tower, which is why it's so open, whereas Light's is closed off and nobody can get in. And it could be a sign that L may have been genuine when he said Light wanted to be a friend. He wanted Light to be a friend. He wanted to let Light into his tower, to put him up on the same pedestal, but he also thinks he's Kira, so what can he do? The truck commented how since L has no clue that the notebook is even involved, that there's even a notebook, possession may not seem that far-fetched, right? And I hadn't thought about this. I think I talked about this in the discussion for the last episode. But it occurs to me that we as the audience are very biased in our opinions because we've seen things from Light's perspective this entire time. So we know about the notebook, we know about the rules, we're told about the rules each episode, but Elle has no idea. So it kind of ties, the truck's comment kind of ties to Tim Schulte, who said, you know, if we watched this story from Elle's perspective, would we still think Light is Kira? Could we connect those dots? I would argue we could connect the dots, but there would still be that shadow of a doubt, right? I think, especially with Misa, I think as much evidence as we have on Misa at this point of being second Kira, the only thing that makes her not seem like second Kira is that she's so immediate to suggest that she would be second Kira, and Elle's like, well, that seems kind of weird. So I think we would have came to the same conclusion about her, but as far as Light being Kira, I think that knowing what Elle has pointed out to us, it would seem like, okay, but that depends on if we believe in Elle or not. If we believe that Elle's trustworthy and we can trust his opinions, then him deducing it's Light makes sense. But if there's doubt with Elle, then you could be like, well, I don't know if you're right or not. What about this or this? So you could kind of argue it either way. So that's kind of cool, Tim, that you and the truck pointed out how skewy this thing is. And the fact that they have no clue about the notebook makes it all the more plausible that Light could not be Kira. It's like, but we, the audience, know that he is. So it's so frustrating. And then the truck also said, you know, my question would be, because the truck was pointing out about possession being more likely. You know, you have this magical notebook, whereas possession seems like a more plausible thing. But my counter to that would only be, you know, how does possession and accountability align in this, right? Because Elle seems... What's funny about this is that Elle seems to want to prove that Light is Kira, not only to prove that he's right, because Elle hates to lose, but also because a plea of insanity is not going to fall in line with Elle's sense of justice, right? Elle's sense of justice will not... He seemed he had a lot of disdain in the last episode when he was like, is he suggesting that he wasn't conscious or aware? I think that there's a lot of... You could argue that Kira has been aware of what they've been doing. The question is there possession or not? Who's to say that there isn't? It's like, you know, the whole Shinigami thing. Could Elle think that Light was possessed by a Shinigami? Kind of was. So it's weird. And I do think rewatching these last few episodes and seeing how much Light is different than how he was this entire series, I'm like, did the Death Note affect his personality? Did it amplify his ego and give him this god complex? Was it in fact the Death Note doing all of this? We don't know. So it's like Light is a whole different person, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I almost miss the ego Light because he's so diabolical and you just love to loathe him, that this Light is like a damn cinnamon bun. And Elle's like, I like sweet things, but geez. So yeah, those are my comments for episode 18. I don't know what to think. I refuse to believe that this entire rest of the series, this episode is the halfway point. So I feel like this episode is going to set the stage for we're at the halfway mark of the series. I refuse to believe that Light is going to not ever hear the Death Note or see Rim and Ryuk again the rest of the series. Absolutely not. I don't think that's going to happen. He's going to meet up with them again. The question is, will he remember them? And if not, what is he going to think of them? How's this going to work? Are they going to give him the Death Note back? Is he going to want it back? Is he going to be like, oh my god, Elle was right this whole time and I am Kira? I don't know. And I don't want to be spoiled either. Again, I have the comment note. I don't want to use it. So yeah. Just choked on some spit, no worries. But let's, so let's do this, shall we? I'm excited to see what's going to happen, y'all. I hope y'all are too, but we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to dive into episode 18 of Death Note, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Huh. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is so interesting, right? I didn't know how I would feel about Light not being like ego Light anymore. He's Watson Light, right? But he's like become the most ideal model shonen protagonist. And L has become interesting and shady. So, it's funny how all this is going down. And the whole thing with Aizawa, I think, makes a lot more sense. Because I think L tested Aizawa for a reason. And we'll talk about this, especially by the end of this. But what the fudge? L gets more. It's funny because you have Light and L are on two sides of the same coin, right? They're equals. And so whenever you have Light be this egotistical god complex of a man, it makes L look like a sweet little cinnamon bun, right? In comparison, like our little toad moth boy that is just like attached to the flame. But when the situation is reversed and Light becomes the cinnamon roll, then L becomes kind of shadier and has the complex. So it's funny that you see these two characters who have the same personalities. They're just flip-flopped. They reflect off of each other in different ways, right? Light brings out something in L when he's in a certain way, and L brings out something in Light when he's in a certain way. And Light encouraging him, I'm like, oh my God. So we're gonna break this episode down, but I'm so curious. I'm so very curious. Here's the crazy thing about all of this, and I don't know if Light anticipated this happening or not. I don't know if Light could anticipate how he would react without the Death Note, but L is figuring out how the Death Note works without Light even telling him. That's the crazy thing. He's figuring it out. And it's like, and he doesn't even realize that he's figuring it out. That's the insane part about it. So we need to break down this episode. We need to break it down. We still have the old OP. I'm fully convinced that, I don't know if next episode we'll get a new one or not. I don't know. It seems like we're still in this, it feels like that the good Light is a mini arc. I don't know. After this episode, it would be kind of interesting if Light remained the way that he was, like until like the late 20s of the episodes maybe, and then something happened that made him go back, but I don't know, right? It's so bizarre. But the good news is in all this, we're actually getting a chance for L and Light to become friends and have friendship moments. So it's like, the mangaka's like, you want your cake? You want to eat it too? You want to be like, L? Okay, sure, we'll give it to you. It's curious, right? Okay. I also want to make note that, again, we're talking about the Death Note being the forbidden fruit that we're not supposed to eat. The image is of the apple with a bite taken out of it, and then it transforms into the Death Note. So yeah, the Death Note is that knowledge that changes us, that changes people like Light and Misa into other beings. Or so it seems, right? Interesting. Because even once Misa had the Death Note, that's something too. God, I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to put the Death Note up here. I'm going to put the Death Note up here. Because, yeah, that is something to make note too, is that Misa with the Death Note, when we first met her, she had the Death Note already. So her personality was kind of tied to that. So her whole yandere persona was really amplified by the Death Note, if you think about it. Because now, like back then, she was like, oh, what a great way to kill people. And so the Death Note, I'm wondering if it enhances your desire to kill others. Because even way back in the episode we first met Misa properly, and she got the backstory about Jealous and how Shinigami's died, and she's like, what a beautiful way to kill. And not a beautiful way to die. And I remember commenting how weird it was. Well, now I'm like, what if the Death Note, using it enhances that desire to kill, and it makes you keep using it? It's addictive. It's like a drug. The Death Note is like a drug. And you get addicted. And even Light said that at one point. He said you get addicted to it, right? So now they've gone through rehab and they're having withdrawals because Misa's not the same. Misa is not that yandere character. She's still at her core like how we know her. And Light at his core is still this smart, intelligent boy that we've known him as. But the Death Note enhanced that mindset. I don't want L to have the Death Note now. No, if L's like this without it, I don't want L to have the Death Note. I've said that the last several episodes. I'm like, oh, I think L will end up with it. I don't want L to end up with it. Nope. If the Death Note does, in fact, it doesn't necessarily possess you. like what they think it does is what they're suspecting, but it enhances that desire to kill. I don't want L to have that, because L is all about eye for an eye. We'll talk about that. I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So yeah, but the whole concept of seeing how different Light is without the Death Note makes me think more and more that, yeah, the Death Note might enhance those traits in people and bring out the worst in you that think that. And so who's to say that it doesn't? But Ally. This episode's called Ally. And we get at the end L's allies that he's brought in. Mm-hmm. It should be noted that I think from the very start of this episode, I feel like they bookend with Aizawa. They start out the episode with Aizawa and they bookend and end the episode with Aizawa for a reason. And it's to show that Aizawa, he's not fitting in this mold. So we're going to put L right here. We're going to put L right here. L/Ryuzaki. We're going to put him right over here. And I'm going to put Light over here. And then we have our other players, and my dog is at my feet, so it's a little bit harder. But we have I'm going to call him Daddy Yagami, because he's no longer Chief. Old Daddy Yagami. We're going to put him here. We're going to put Matsuda over here. And we're going to have Aizawa here. And I'm going to tie Misa over here. Our girl Misa, she's probably having the worst time out of everybody, other than Aizawa. But it's interesting that we bookend this episode starting with Aizawa and ending with him. Should have all made sense from the start, right? But there's all these protocols to get into. You also got a scar on your eye, Aizawa. You might want to check that out. But all the protocols to get into the secret facility, like the fingerprint and the eyes, everything, and then the security. And I like that Aizawa can't figure it out, right? He can't figure it out. And I wondered what the bandage on his head was, so I'm glad that Daddy Yagami asks about it. But yeah, so he can't figure out the security. And I like that Watari's watching, being like, he's just not used to it. Again, it's like, you'll just have to get used to our security system. Watari is just as devious as L is. Interesting. Uh-huh. And he's like, enough! And then he's like, how's this? And then he shows up. Doesn't even bother to put his pants back on. And they're like, oh God, Aizawa. Again? What happened to your... I like the Daddy Yagami. I like the old chief. He doesn't question Aizawa's like, why are you holding your shoes? He's like, what happened to your head? And got in a fight with his wife. Mm-hmm. It's like, my wife and I had a fight. And he's like, oh, my kid is still young, so it looks like I'll be commuting. She didn't want him to leave. Yeah. So Aizawa, his wife, wants him home. And I like that Chief Yagami, he understands where Aizawa is coming from. I think that he makes the argument to him later. He's like, well, look, I can get away with doing all this because my son's in college and my daughter's in high school. They can take care of themselves, and my wife knows that I'm on the job. She doesn't need me to be home. You have a baby and a young daughter. You need to be home with your wife. I don't have to. So we're in totally different departments. And I like that Chief Yagami's like, you should live at home. And Matsuda's like, what a waste! Matsuda, we'll talk about him. He's like, he's our bachelor. He's like, these rooms are amazing. And Aizawa's like, yeah, you can enjoy them because you're a bachelor. He's like, don't lump me in with a carefree bachelor like you. Mm-hmm. And he's like, where's Ryuzaki? And they're like, well, he's on a date. The three of them are in Misa's room. I love it. I love that they're just like, wow, surveillance cameras, huh? Can't be helped. And so at this point, it should be noted that they've changed their tune a little bit already. They say, we believe Amane might be involved with the second Kira. Not is the second Kira. Light still believes that they are, but now Misa has been downgraded to being involved with the second Kira. That's where we're at, right? I also, girl, that outfit, that skimpy outfit with the tights. Mm-hmm. Stop calling her Misa. Mm-hmm. Oh, he's like, oh, sure. I love this. I want to get the picture of her face. So, man, they draw her so well in this. this opening shot of her just looking absolutely, could not be less thrilled at the idea that Elle is just hanging out with Light and them. I love it. So yeah. And then we'll get this little picture of her. Okay. It's great. I just love it. I'm going to put a picture up here and get it. So yeah, Misa is not happy that Elle and Light are stuck together because she's like, how can I go on a date when you're always there? I can't sit next to Light. I can't do anything. She's like, this doesn't feel like a date. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, pay no attention to me. I like that, like, Elle's like, it's fine. He's like, don't worry about it. And so this is the thing too. So I'm very curious about this too, because Misa, when she had the death note, she like went to the cafe and had the sweets and everything and had the sundae. And maybe that was the case then, but here she's like, oh, sweets are fattening. I try not to eat them too much. I'm like, but she ate it, like went to the Sunday store to like celebrate and do all that. So maybe that was just the one Sunday a week she had, and she had her cheat day and she was fine, right? But I love that Elle's like, you want to eat all that? And he's like, well, if you use your head, you can still eat sweets without gaining weight. He does kind of insult her there because she's like, are you suggesting I'm stupid so I'll get fat if I eat sweets? And he's like, argh. I love that Elle just kind of gave her an insult without really meaning it. She's like, I'll give you the cake so you leave me alone with Light. And he's like, even if I leave you two alone, I'll be watching with surveillance cameras. Elle he's so devoid of life. Elle is depressed. He is depressed. I also like that Light does not have a shirt on underneath that like zip up cardigan. And he's just like, this is like, Light still has the give me strength face, but it's more like an innocent give me strength. It's just like just, he's at peace, right? It's funny. You pervert, will you stop doing sick things? And he's like, and I love that Elle puts his foot on the desk, reaches over and grabs the cake like a damn zombie. He's like, call me whatever you like, but I'm taking your cake. And she's like, fine, I'll close the curtains and turn off the lights. And he's like, oh, we have infrared cameras. She's just like, oh my God. And then Light says, okay, changing the subject. Because again, Light does not like Mika. Misa. He doesn't like Misa. He's just going along with it. He says it's a one-sided thing. So yeah, Light's like, okay, changing the subject. We've moved in this fully equipped headquarters, but you don't seem enthusiastic, Ryuzaki. And he's like, enthusiasm? He's like, I don't have any. I'm depressed. And I love that Light's like, you're depressed? Like, what do you mean, old buddy, old pal? And he's just like, yes. At the time, all this time, I thought you were Kira. And so I was shocked that my deduction was wrong. So he's depressed that he was wrong. And Light is concerned about Elle's enthusiasm. What a bizarre world where Light is concerned for Elle. And he's genuine about it. It's like, what? So yeah, he's like, I'm just shocked that I was wrong. And he's like, I'm still suspicious of you, hence the handcuffs. Otherwise, I wouldn't have that. And he's like, but Kira can control people's actions. And so he's like, in other words, Kira was controlling you to make me suspect that you were Kira. So he's mad that there's a possession involved, right? So here's the thing. So we established that Kira can control others' actions. But I'm like, Elle, you're not wrong. Kira can control your actions if you write their name in the death note. I'm like, no, Elle, no, you're right. He can control their actions. It's true. It's true. But he thinks that it means that Kira was controlling Light and making Elle suspect him. And I love he's just like, you and Misa are both controlled by Kira. Like, he just looks like the most depressed little toad. He's just all hunched up there. It's like, what the fudge? Oh, and he's like, when I think about it, everything matches up. He's like, no, it all makes sense. And Light's like, well, by that reasoning, if Misa and I were controlled by Kira, doesn't that mean that we are still Kira? He's like, yeah. He's like, I'm not wrong. You were. He's like, you are both Kira. So yeah, so L still believes. He believes that at one time, Light and Misa were Kira, or still are. He's like, I'm not fully convinced that you're not. You're both Kira, right? And God, their faces and their expressions, they're both like so determined to prove him wrong. He's like, I think that when you were confined, you were Kira, which is true. And while you were confined, criminals stopped dying, which is true. So you were Kira until then, so it works out. But after 2 weeks, criminals began dying again. Based on that evidence, I love it. He's just like, based on that evidence, I think Kira's powers can pass from person to person. So yes, he figures it out. Yeah, the powers can transfer. He's cracked the code. I'm like, you cracked the code, L. But he's not enthusiastic about it because, and Light's like, well, that's an interesting idea. That's totally true. I love that Light's like, huh, imagine that. I wonder what that would be like. It's just like, oh my God. He's like, but if that's true, it won't be easy to catch Kira. And he's like, yes, that's why I'm at a loss. So yeah, that would make, it would make capture of Kira hard. It also explains why up until this point, because in the back of my mind, I was like, man, if this power of the Death Note has been going on for a while, nobody's caught on. But it would be so easy to just lose the trail instantly, because once you get rid of the Death Note, all your memories are gone. All of anything, to any knowledge of it tied to it is gone. So yeah, it's like you just wipe the trail. You just wipe the trail clean. You start from scratch. So if anybody was suspecting you was on the trail, you suddenly just erase the trail. It's actually kind of genius, and it explains why no one's really caught up to Kira up until now, because it's so easy just to move from person to person and be lost, right? He's like, that's why I'm at a loss. He's like, even if we catch those under Kira's control, the power will be passed on to others, and the former will have no memory of their actions. He's just figuring it all out. Yeah. So he's figuring it out. So he's realizing, there is the realizing that trails can be wiped clean. He's like, as a detective, that's frustrating, because you can narrow something in and then it just jumps to the next person, and everything you've worked so hard to get is suddenly gone and you're left with nothing. And so that's why he's upset. He's like, which means it's useless to catch anyone. And I love that Light's like, well, that's not definite yet, so show some energy, L. So Light's like, show some energy. Show some energy, L. The fact that Light Yagami is asking L to buck up is like, what? So, yeah, but yeah, for L as a detective, he's like, it's useless to catch Kira. He's like, why? He's like, it'll just pass on to somebody else and all of my work will be meaningless. He's just in a slump. He's like, show some energy. I like that Light's like scolding him, and he's like, energy? He's like, I'm not feeling it. Why bother? And then he's like, trying hard to go after him just puts us in danger. Which, he's not wrong there. He's not wrong, because he's like, why should we try to catch this person? Because if we try to go after him and we don't know everything, he's like, we just found all these curveballs out in the final hour of the last jaunt. He's like, if we try to go after Kira and we don't know everything, then we could have everything turned on our heads and it'd be for nothing. He's like, and plus they still have the power to kill. He doesn't know about the Death Note, but he knows that Kira has the power to kill. So he's like, if we just chase after him, we're putting ourselves in danger. So there's no point. And he's like, nope. And he's just like, don't you think so? And Light is like, Ryuzaki. And I love that he like pulls it back and punches him. Like, what the fudge? What a shot. Light punching L. So yeah, so Light Light punches L and vice versa. I just love that Light's like, I'm gonna beat you into being enthusiastic. And Misa's like, what? Oh my god. These two. And Misa's like, oh my, and she steps on the cake. I love she's so concerned and yelling, and then she steps on the cake and is like, oh, ew. Like, she's just so, God, it's great. She's just so not concerned. It's, oh, the comedy relief. I love it. And then Elle's like, excuse me? Why did you hit me, sir? That hurt. And he's like, stop messing around. Just because you don't feel like doing anything because I wasn't Kira and because your deduction was wrong. And he's like, I may have phrased it wrong. So Elle does not like to lose, but that's not why he's depressed. He's like, I meant it would be a waste for us to make a move, so we shouldn't. And he's like, we can't catch him if we don't chase him. So Light wants to pursue Kira. And Elle says it's dangerous to pursue Kira. He's like, no, it's dangerous to pursue Kira because what happens if it gets past to somebody else and then we're in a bad spot? And Light's like, no, we should chase after him. Come on, show some backbone. He's like, do you know how many innocent people you've involved in this case? Oh, which is rich coming from Light, who's killed half of them. It's rich. It's rich that Light's like, do you know how many innocent people you've involved? So Light, he talks about the innocents involved. I'm like, well, you killed Naomi. You killed Rei. Misa killed Ukita. So technically, the innocents that Elle is involved, you both have killed. So, of course Elle knows about the innocents involved. And that's kind of why I think he's arguing where he's like, I don't want to just... Elle's like, I thought I had it all figured out. I don't want to rush into this now and us not be foolproof ready to go. He's like, if we're going to attack, we need to be ready to win, and that's it. Like, no holds bars, no mercy, nothing. He's like, and I wasn't like that last time, and everything got flipped upside down. So he's like, why would I want to risk that again? And he's like, besides that, you're the one who can find Misa and me. And he's like, I know. He's like, but whatever the reason... And then, yeah, he kicks Light with that nasty foot. Oh, honey. He's like, an eye for an eye. So that is fascinating. An eye for an eye. Because that is kind of like Kira logic. Just a bit. Because, yeah, what he's suggesting is, well, if you punch me, I'll punch you back. But it's like... But Kira's whole thing was to punish criminals. So it's like, if you killed me, I'll kill you sort of thing. So that is interesting because I'm not sure it aligns with the type of justice that Elle has been purporting this entire time, that he's been proposing. So that's curious, but he is saying an eye for an eye. And them attached. I love the camera work of them falling backwards with the handcuffs. Like, the camera work is so good. And then both falling. I thought Elle was going to fall on top of Light, but no. We can't have that BL moment. Absolutely not. I love that this whole time Aizawa and Matsuda and Daddy Yagami are just watching this all go down. They're like, seems legit. He's like, it's not that my deduction was wrong. The fact is the case isn't going to be simply solved as Light Yagami is Kira and Misa Amani is second Kira. So yeah, Elle is like, he's like, I'm not wrong, but the answer isn't simple. He's like, I thought we could just make this a black and white case. I prove you're Kira, I prove she's second Kira, and we're done. He's like, but no, what's frustrating is it's not going to be that easy. There's all these other factors to it now. And he's like, and I'm pissed off because I can't just say you're Kira. Now I have to prove all these other things. He's like, it's tedious. He's like, it's tedious. And I like that Elle saying, I'm a little disappointed because of that. I'm human. Isn't that allowed? So here's an interesting thing too. Elle says, I'm human. Isn't that allowed? And Light says, no, it's not. So that's funny that Elle says, I'm human. I'm human. And Light is like, no. He doesn't say I'm not, but it's kind of like the situation of you have L, who, the funny thing is that L says that he's a human, but has been viewed like a deity in this series. And you have Light saying, no, it's not that you're human, and he's been viewed as a human. Because yeah, this entire time, L has had this persona surrounding him, that he's this master detective, that he's the greatest detective that ever lived, that he can solve any case, that he's larger than life, that he's almost like a deity, right? And even like Chief Yagami in the last episode was like, you know, L's will is absolute. I think that's what the English dub says. But L, meanwhile, is saying, no, I'm just human. He's like, I can make mistakes. He's like, I know that. It's just frustrating and I'm disappointed. You know, aren't I allowed to feel those emotions because I'm human? Light, who's been trying to pass on this persona that he's just a normal human being this entire time, has secretly viewed himself as having a god complex and saying that he's the deity of this new world. And now he's telling Ellie, he's like, no, you're not just a normal human. He's like, the way you talk, it's almost like you won't be satisfied unless I'm Kira. And he says, I won't be satisfied unless you're Kira? That may be true. I just realized that I wanted you to be Kira. Oh, that's so chilling. He wanted Light to be Kira. And then the question remains, why? Why did you want him to be Kira? Because it was so perfect? Because he was on the same level as you? I don't want spoilers, obviously, but that's so curious where he's like, I wanted you to be Kira. Ugh, chills! Chills! And then that's when he punches him again. Only he doesn't move. He's like an eye for an eye. Oh my god. I love it. It's great. And he says, I'll have you know I'm quite strong. And he spins around and kicks him like Sherlock style. It's great. But yeah. And then Matsuda's like, you know, we should probably call the room and stop him. And oh my god, these two boys, these grown-ass men with there's like L's tiny little butt crack shown on there. These skinny boys, and Misa's like in the corner like, please stop fighting. And then both, and then he's like, yes. Oh my god, the way that Ryuzaki holds the phone. It's absolutely hilarious. Oh my god, it's great. Where he's like, we've just been scuffling and beating each other up senselessly, but what? He's like, listen, Ryuzaki, Misa is #1 in 18 Magazine's reader popularity poll. And he's like, yes. He's like, so thus, that means it's been decided she'll be starring as the next heroine in the next film. And then he's like, nope, okay, good, we're back to reality. He's like, Matsuda's being an idiot again. Oh god! Matsuda's a natural at that. So Matsuda is Misa's manager. And he's been relegated to small tasks. And Matsuda feels like he's being viewed as an idiot. But I love that L just kind of like crawls around like a damn toad there. It's ridiculous. And I love that Chief Yagami's like, Chief Yagami giving the side eye. He's like, what is up with you? He's like, I can hear you. It's so funny. I love it. But yeah, so 2 months pass. So then we have 2 months later. So a whole 60 days pass. Oh my god. Like just time flying by in this world. And so Light doing his diligence work. And I love that what's interesting in all this is that, one, Ryuzaki looks freaking adorable, like in the little chair where he's like Ryuzaki has just lost the spark. He has lost the will to be a detective. He's just like, no, I can't do it anymore. Meanwhile, Light is pulling his weight. Pulling weight in detective work. And honestly, this is like my alternate universe coming true. I wanted to see L and Light work together as detectives. And it's kind of fascinating because it's like, okay, if they really were working together in this, would L slouch while Light was like doing all the work and doing all the heavy lifting? Is that how it would work? I'm just kind of baffled by all of this. He's like, I know you're not into this, but come over here for a second and take a good look. And I love that he just peers in. Oh my God, the two of these two, I cannot. Mm-mm. And they noticed that the 3 members that just died over the weekend were Japanese businessmen. And it allowed, all 3 of them died of heart attacks. And it allowed Yotsuba's stock prices to rise and the other companies to plummet. In other words, they're deaths that are in Yotsuba's favor. And I like that Light's eyes kind of get a little shadowy there. They get a little cast there, like a little bit of shadow. So Light is busy connecting Yotsuba, the Yotsuba company, to all of this and making note about everything. And saying, looking back, there have been 13 such cases in the past 3 months. So those 3 months, so it said 2 months later. So as far back as, you know, they said during those 50 days. Okay, so doing the timeline, we had Yotsuba, Light is suspect. Okay, so 2 months ago is when L and Light fight. But then 1 month back further, so 3 months, that would be during the confinement. So in other words, while Light was confined and had lost his memory of using the Death Note, while all that was going on, that's why Rem had been working on this while this was happening. Okay. And so Kira is supporting Yotsuba. And he's like, yes, but if that's true, then punishing criminals is not this Kira's intent. So L makes a note of this Kira. So he's fully accepted that Light, he still thinks Light and Misa are the original Kiras, but he believes there's a new Kira. And he's like, then punishing criminals is not this Kira's true intent. Punishing criminals is a front. And the killing people is for the benefit of this company. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, what do you think? Do you feel a little bit more enthusiastic now? I love that Light is trying to make Elle feel better. And I'm like, oh my God. He's trying to make Elle feel more enthusiastic about trying to solve the case. I'm like, I just imagine this alternate universe where Light and Elle are detectives together and Elle gets in a slump and Light's like, oh, come on, friend, let's go get coffee and let's go solve a case and make yourself feel better. Like, just... the funny thing is that this episode, it makes me hopeful and want to see Light and Elle be bestie friends and solve the case together. That's what it meant to make me feel. But I know that deep down, there's something sinister at work here, and I don't like it. But I don't know what else to do right now because we don't know the situation. So, but the fact that Light's trying to encourage Elle when 3 episodes ago he was going to kill him. What? Okay, so we had these rules established. The borrower of the Death Note will not be followed by a god of death. The god of death always remains with the owner of the Death Note. Also, the borrower cannot trade the eyesight of a god of death. Okay, so if Light loaned Elle the Death Note, hypothetically, if Light loaned Elle the Death Note, then Ryuk would not have to follow Light. He'd have to stick over here with Light. And Elle could not get the Shinigami eyes. Okay. But then this next one is the one that's interesting. This next one is the interesting one. When the owner of the Death Note dies, while the note is being lent, its ownership will be transferred to the person who was holding it at the time. So if Elle was holding the Death Note for Light and Light died, the ownership would pass to Elle. Okay. So that means that Rim got the Death Note then from Jealous and then gave the Death Note to Misa. Okay. Fair enough. Interesting. So we cut back to the Yotsuda company, and they're worried. This white-haired guy is, of course, worried about something, because why not? He's worried about why 3 people that they decided to kill last week died of heart attacks. They're like, we decided to make one die from an accident. And so then the one guy is like, well, that's probably because we chose the accident to occur at the Coastal Bay route. And then at the point in time, he wasn't at his home. He snuck off to Italy with a woman. So the Yotsuba Council, the Yotsuba company, they don't know all the rules. And they are hiring Kira to kill for them. But what they don't know is that somebody at that table is already Kira. They just think that they're hiring somebody else. So the request was impossible. I think it's the bald man that is Kira. So if the request is impossible, Kira kills by a heart attack. And like, it's like I told you last week. If you request only accidental deaths and disease, they're finished in a natural way in the shortest amount of time. And they're like, well, the police are too busy to investigate the remaining deaths of criminals. Oh, you'd be surprised. You would be surprised who's busy. So then if someone could trace the deaths back to us, then it would be a problem. Yeah, then the only way they could trace it back is if they were a god. Who traces it back to them? So it's funny that they make the comment, Yotsuba does, that the only ones who could trace to them would be a god. And Light and L, well, mainly Light, is tracing back to them. How about that? How about that? Funny, huh? I think that's funny. And he's like, we've taken precautions. So I like Misa's just sitting there on their phone. And he's like, oh, and Mogi, thanks for all your hard work today. And so then they've taken the precautions with the police force by giving them some leeway to make it to where they won't chase after the Yotsuba group. And he's like, Yotsuba? He's like, yes. He's like, that's probably the case, Matsuda. But we just heard from the director that Kira's offered bribes to politicians. So this Kira has bribed politicians. It's funny, you know, it's when you see Kira used in the hands of others that are not like Yagami, it almost makes you want Light to take it back. Because Light at least had some kind of sense of, you could argue against it, but at least it was some kind of semblance of justice. Whereas these guys, the Yotsuba company, there's no sense of justice at all. They're just using it for their own personal gain, and that's it, right? Which is what's frustrating. And so then we have the chief of police saying that Kira said as long as the police didn't chase him, then he wouldn't lay a hand on the politicians. And so then Yagami's like, the police caved into Kira. And so I love that Light like jumps out of his seat and L's like, so we established, Daddy Yagami says that the police cave in. Go figure. Over politics? What? What are the odds? What are the odds that that the police force would cave to Kira because of politics? So the police are no longer helping. They've caved to Kira's demands. Man, back several episodes ago, it was to save their fellow officers' lives in the face of certain doom, but get a politician involved and everything kind of falls to shit. Mogi's already made up his mind, so Mogi's decided to stay. Mogi's going to stay. I'm assuming we don't know much about Mogi. Maybe he's a bachelor too. And so that's why he asks Aizawa and Matsuda, if you really want to pursue Kira, then turn in your letters of resignation to the MPA along with Mogi and me. We can't seriously pursue Kira anymore unless you quit the MPA. And Aizawa was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, it's simple. We were told that we would be fired if we pursued Kira with L. Yep. So it's a black and white thing. He's like, yeah, I'm no longer going to be your chief in a few hours. But you all make your own decisions. And of course, Matsuda's like, yeah, he's like, oh, especially those who are married and have children. There's only 2 of us in the room that we know of that have that situation. And Aizawa, sweet Aizawa. That's the thing. Aizawa is like, he is different than Chief Yagami. You could tell this weighs on him. And he's like, I don't want to go, but... And I like that Light's like, I think you should all... And then, so, L says they should all leave. He's like, you should all remain police officers. I was alone to begin with. I'm grateful for you for sticking with me this far. But I can do this all by myself. I'm sure to visit you at the police department when I bring you Kira's head as a gift. Ah! And then Light's like, well, now wait, old buddy, old pal. As long as I'm here, you won't be alone. This is all I wanted. I've wanted this, and now that I'm getting to have my cake and eat it too, I'm like, what's the catch, right? So Light saying Light will stay and help L. He won't be alone. Oh, he's like, as long as I'm here, you won't be alone. Which is so sweet. He's like, you have my promise. Oh, he's like, that's right. I'll have Light working with me until I can catch Kira. But everyone else should be back to being police officers. And he's like, but you told us you needed help with the police. And he's like, 4 men is not the police force. He's like, that's because the police are an organization and they didn't bow to Kira and hope to arrest him. L's like, 4 men are not the same as the entire police force. He's like, when I had the entire police force backing me, I could get special things. I could get access to resources. I could get access to extra men. I could do all these clearances. But if it's just you 4 guys who have resigned from the police force, we're not the police force anymore. Suddenly that doesn't bear any weight. He's like, it's not the same. He's like, do you really think the help of 2 or 3 civilians who quit the police force can really count as the police? And as we see from the clientele that he keeps track of, they all need to be specializing in their jobs and have access because of their jobs. And if Chief Yagami and them quit, he's like, you guys are just civilians. You don't even have access to police force stuff. Like, how is that going to be helpful? Like, before, when they had access to, like, files and records and stuff, he's like, I needed that. But now, he's like, you're not going to be any use to me. Right? Also, the police have decided that they don't want to catch Kira, so that's enough. And he's like, it's true, we wouldn't be much help being police officers. But what about our feelings? Like, Chief Yagami's like, I have a stake in catching this Kira that's framed my son. Gotta catch him, you know? He's like, I have a personal investment in this. We risked our lives to catch Kira. We have at least the right to decide whether we stay here or go back. And he's like, I suppose you're right. Also, let it be known that L can tie cherry stems into a knot with his tongue. Guy's good with his tongue. Just saying. Then decide which do you want to do. And Aizawa's like, if you'll be unemployed if you quit. Like, what if we catch Kira, what are you going to do afterwards? So that's the thing, is that Aizawa needs his job to support his family. And Chief Yagami is like, I'll just get another job. He's like, I was like 3 years out of retirement anyway, so I'll just find something to do for a couple of years till I can retire. But Aizawa is not like Chief Yagami. He's not old like him. He doesn't have like an established like older family. He has a young family. He needs this job. Him and his wife are kind of like on ice anyway. So he's like, quitting my job is not going to be conducive towards a good life for me. He's like, I haven't thought about it, but after we catch Kira. And he just smiles. He just smiles. Oh, Daddy Yagami with that smile. It's like, I guess I'll look for another job. And they're like, oh. And Matsuda's like, well, then I've decided I'm going to join too. I'm a bachelor with no time in my hands. I'm going to quit too. Matsuda's like, I'll get another job somewhere else. I still have to do my job as Misa manager. And then I was like, Matsuda, maybe you shouldn't say this. But he's like, if I went back to the MPA, I'd feel like a loser. And Chief Yagami's like, yeah, you need to stop. I'm going to stop you right there because there's somebody behind you that probably feels that way. So just so you know. Oh. He's like, watch what you say, Matsuda. Aizawa. Yeah. And so he's like, how about if I stayed as a police officer and helped you in my spare time? And Elle's like, nope, that's not good enough. He's like, if you return, don't come back here. He's like, no, he's not gonna endanger you. He's like, I won't give you any information to leak. Yeah. He's like, as detectives, you're free to pursue Kira. But I don't think it's right to give up your livelihoods and harm your families just to pursue Kira. So and it makes more sense now why he's telling Aizawa this with what we find out at the end of this episode, right? So Elle is like, do not sacrifice your livelihoods for Kira unless you're sure. He's like, unless it's a decision you're not going to regret, don't do it. Because I'm about to involve some shady people that's going to make your lives as police officers very questionable. So it makes sense now why he told Aizawa because Aizawa was like, well, I'll just be a police officer and come here in my spare time. And Elle's like, no, I'm about to involve some shady people that if you're still in the police force, you're going to have an obligation to tell on me, and we can't have that. So he's like, no. But if you're just civilians, it won't matter. So he's like, I don't want you to have to put your family in jeopardy. So make that decision based on what is going to be right for you. And Chief Yagami is so nice. He's like, nobody's going to blame you or think of you as a traitor if you quit. And he's like, but Chief, you have a family too. And he's like, my circumstances are a bit different. My son is Kira. He's like, it's different. He's like, it's not fair. I want to stay here too. I was prepared to die at any moment. And if I quit here, how will I be able to face Ukita? He's like, why can't a detective with the MPA remain and pursue Kira? And Elle's like, mm-mm. And so then Watari chimes in. Watari's like, Ryazaki, you're not telling him everything. He's like, Ryazaki, what if in case of anything happened to a member of the task force, even if they were fired from the MPA, you entrusted me to make preparations so that financial support would be offered to their families. So they would never be in need for the rest of their lives. For the rest of their lives! Elle! Bruce Wayne, where are you getting this money? That whole situation, because it's like, okay, Watari was going to sponsor them for the rest of their lives? Where are you getting all this money from, Elle? Spare no expense. But that bombshell, he's like, you said you were going to support their family should anything happen. But Elle didn't want them to know that, right? It's like, why aren't you mentioning that? And Elle's like, who asked you, Watari? And then Matsuda's like, we're being taken care of. I love that Matsuda is the freeloader. He's like, you mean we're getting free money? Matsuda's like just freeloading. He's like, oh, you mean we're fine? We're financially stable? He's like, isn't that wonderful, Aizawa? And no. Aizawa is like, so were you watching to see if I would quit the force and join you? And I like Chief Yagami. He's like, oh, no, I'm sure Elle didn't mean he just says things like that to himself. He didn't mean it. And Matsuda's like, yeah, no. And Elle's like, nah. He's like, I was testing you. I wanted to see what you would choose. And they're like, oh. And Aizawa's like, fine, I'll quit and return to the MPA. And they're like, oh. He says, I couldn't make a decision quickly like you all. And I was leaning towards staying a police officer anyway. And they're like, don't be so stubborn. And he's like, no, I quit. He's like, this made things clear. I hate you, Ryazaki. And I hate the way he does everything. And then Ryazaki says, but I like people like you, Mr. Aizawa. Ah! So Aizawa hates Elle. But Elle likes him. And this is why I think that Elle did not want Watari to say anything about the whole life insurance policy, basically. Because one, I think Elle doesn't want anybody needlessly throwing their lives away. And if Aizawa knew that his family was going to be financially supported no matter what, I think that he'd be like, oh, sure, then I'll just jump into this fire pit. My family will be okay. And Elle's like, think about yourself too, right? So I think it's partially for that reason, but also because Elle doesn't want people joining haphazardly. He's like, no, if we're pursuing Kira, it has to be a decision you won't regret. And saying that there's this fancy schmancy life insurance policy is like a cushiony insurance plan to where you think, oh, I'll just join because there's no risk. And he's like, nah, there's a lot of risk to this. I'm not going to have that. So it makes sense why he did not want Aizawa to know that. But Aizawa, he's like, I can't stand how you say things like this so shamelessly. And he's like, thank you for your hard work. L. And L just sits there in the chair. So yeah, I think L was trying to save Aizawa in that moment because he's like, Aizawa's not fully on the plan. He's not fully involved. He has a family, a young wife and kids that he can't afford to lose. And so he's like, if Aizawa's not involved, it may be for the better of the entire group. Because Aizawa's been struggling this whole time with it. He's like, nah, you need to go. So yeah. So then he leaves. And we have Misa getting ready in her apartment. They're like, oh, we found another. A branch manager of Yotsuba's biggest rival bank died on September 7th when he slipped on the steps of his home. And that was a Friday. And Daddy Yagami making progress, right? So he starts to connect dots. And we have this really cute, like, father-son bonding. This cute father-son bonding with him trying to figure out things too. It's like the dream squad here. We got Matsuda, Light, L, and Chief Yagami. It's so cute. I'm like, Light's dad, like, helping them out. He's like, there should be some sort of hint, Dad. And Light looks so innocent there. It's like, what? It's so adorable that Light's just like, okay, Dad, let's solve the case. He's like, that's right, son. We haven't lost to you. I haven't lost to you and Ryuzaki yet. I'm like, what? This is so wholesome and sweet. And it's just a bait. It's just bait to lure us into a false sense of security. When Chief Yagami said, I don't want to be dead weight here, I was like, don't you say that. Don't you foreshadow like that, Chief Yagami. Don't you dare. But it's also said the whole deadweight line is Matsuda feels like it's directed towards me because Light and L and Chief Yagami are doing all this research and Mogi's out doing a bunch of stuff in the field. Like Mogi comes in with 300,000 pages on Yotsuba. He's like, these are all the domestic employees in the Yotsuba group. 300,000 pages worth. Oh my God. And he's like, thank you, Mogi. It's insanity. He's like, I'm impressed you compiled the list so quickly. And Matsuda's like, I feel like I'm not doing my part. Right? So, Matsuda, he feels he's not pulling his weight. He feels like he's not doing all that he could to help out, right? He's been Misa's manager, but that's literally been it. He's like, what else can I do, Ryuzaki? Is there anything I can do besides being a manager? And he's like, oh yeah, sure. Go get me some coffee. And it's like, oh, Matsuda's been treated like an intern. It's like, oh. He's like, what? And for our guests there, who just pop right in fresh as daisies. These two. So, yeah. Okay, let's talk about these two that come in here. Who are they? How did they get in? And he's like, they are our new members. Which, it's like, what? Iber, a con man, and Weeby. The fudge? So, yeah, okay. So, L's got friends in low places. He's got Iber, who is a con man, and Weeby, who is a thief, neither of which I think are their real names, for the record. This one with the hat that looks kind of maybe Russian. He's like, I'm a con man, I'm Weeby, a thief by trade. And they're like, a con man and a thief? And he's like, yes. Ivor has excellent social skills. He's a con man who can cozy up to our target. We'll use him for infiltrative investigations. And Weeby is a thief who can crack any lock, safe, or security system. As proof, she entered without any of us noticing. And they're like, we're going to be working together with criminals? And L is like, yes, we are. They're criminals, but not the type who will surface and be killed by Kira. Think of them as pros of the underworld. And Light's like, okay, I see. If we want to investigate Yotsuba, we need people like them. Yes, Light, that's L's thing. He's like, okay, let's all work together and give it our all! I'm like, Light just being like, let's work together and do the best that we can to catch Kira. I'm like, but that's the other thing too, is that L, involving this con man and a thief, if Aizawa had stayed a police officer and tried to just like sneak in to help out, he would be obligated, he'd be in trouble because these guys are criminals. So he'd be put on the spot to do something as a police officer. And that's why L's like, I feel like L knew he was going to hire these guys before Aizawa left. And he's like, I want to make sure you guys are all on board with this because I'm about to use some people that are a little sketch. And if you're still in the squad, then this may not work out. So I'm like, oh! Also, L hiring criminals is fascinating because it kind of flies in the face of Kira's whole thing about killing criminals. And L's sense of justice gets more and more intriguing. Like, what? Excuse me, what? It gets more and more intriguing. I'm just saying. Okay, and they're like, yeah, sure, we'll all work together. Blech. Here. And so then we cut back to Aizawa, who's on the park bench. For a second, I thought Aizawa was going to die in this episode. He cries at the end of it. He starts crying, but I honestly thought he was going to die. I thought that him hunched over was like him having a heart attack and dying, like Kira had killed him. That's what I thought was happening. I was like, what? But no, he's really sad because, and the wife saying she didn't buy enough to feed him dinner. She wasn't expecting him to come back. And he's like, oh, I haven't had a break in a while now, so I got some time off. And she's like, is it a vacation? And he's like, yeah, that's what it is. He's like, from now on, I'm off every week. So I can take you to the park. Or the zoo. Or even the amusement park. Oh. And she's like, why is Dad crying? So, did he get fired? So, did he quit the force and get fired? Or is he just saying because he's not involved in the case, he'll have more time now? Because it made it sound like he got fired anyway, regardless, right? That's what it made it sound like. And now he's completely cut out of the loop. He doesn't have access to all of them or the police force. So that's curious if he actually got fired or not. That's curious. Because if he actually got fired and he's no longer involved with any of this, it's almost like L's little division here is like its own little Death Note cult. Like you get a little piece of the apple with L, and then when you no longer are a part of it, you're completely shut out. Kind of like when you let go of possession of the Death Note, you're completely shut out from it. Just, what? What? But yeah, I'm floored. I am floored that we're seeing Light and L working together and then working to try to find this second Kira group. I feel like they're going to find out who they are and catch them like fairly soon. I feel like they've made themselves too obvious, but is that the intent? Is that Light's plan all along? I don't know. So that's going to be interesting to see how that adds up. But yeah, so now it's just we're slowly whittling down, right? We're slowly whittling down. We have L, Light, and Misa working with Daddy Yagami and Matsuda. So we're down to 5. What are we going to do from there? Is L going to try to run Matsuda and Daddy Yagami off to keep them out of everything? I don't think Chief Yagami's leaving. I think he's there for the long haul. And Matsuda too, unless Matsuda gets killed off, but I don't know. I don't want anybody killed off, but at this point, I don't know. We're only at the halfway point. This feels like we're nearing the climax. I keep thinking like, oh, we'll be done in 24 episodes, like a traditional anime season. We'll be done in 24 episodes and that's it. Ta-da! But no, 24 episodes is not the ending. So we're only at the halfway point. What? So, I'm very curious to know your thoughts down below. I I feel like this episode is setting up things. The setup episode. It's setting up things to come in the future, but I'll be curious to see what ends up happening. So I'm excited to watch the dub, though. Should be a fun time. But in any case, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with episode 19 of Death Note. Bye.